Have you ever asked yourself why some conflicts receive extensive media coverage while others remain largely unnoticed? Why is the Sudan conflict, for example, often overshadowed amid the global media landscape? In the vastness of Africa, where a conflict has been simmering for the rest of the world, remains largely oblivious. Sudan, a nation with a profound historical significance and a vibrant culture, is embroiled in a state of constant upheaval. Its inhabitants are trapped in an intricate maze of political instability and escalating violence. The conflict has its origins in a power struggle between the government and opposition forces, as well as territorial disputes with neighboring countries. It's an evolving narrative of power, territory, and tribal allegiances, a story that refuses to end. The South Sudanese conflict, as an illustration, initiated as a political rivalry between two key figures, President Salva Kiir and Vice President Riek Machar. This ignited a brutal civil war that persisted from 2013 to 2018. This horrific period in Sudan's history led to an estimated 400,000 deaths and a massive refugee crisis that continues to impact the region and the world. Despite the signing of a peace agreement in 2018, the progress towards lasting peace has been slow and sporadic. Frequent clashes and a recent recommitment to the peace agreement by the conflicting factions make the situation even more complex and precarious. In addition, the tension along the Sudan-Ethiopia border has intensified due to the conflict in Ethiopia's Tigray region. The disputed territory of Al-Fashqa has become a flashpoint in these tensions, with Sudan's military recently thwarting an incursion by Ethiopian forces. However, despite the gravity of these conflicts, they often receive minimal coverage in the Western media. They are largely overshadowed by conflicts in regions like Ukraine or Palestine. The bias is clear in the way these conflicts are reported, with the Sudanese conflict often pushed to the periphery. Does this imply a lack of understanding, an oversight, or a deliberate choice by the media? What factors drive the media's decision on what to cover and what to ignore? Is it strategic interests, audience preference, or the inability to access or understand the intricacies of these conflicts? The lack of coverage undoubtedly impacts the Sudanese people, their fight for peace, and how the world perceives their struggle. This gap in media coverage raises crucial questions: the role of the media in shaping perceptions and narratives about global conflicts. To answer these questions and to fully understand the scale, drivers, and implications of the Sudan conflict, we must delve deep into its history. What causes have shaped it? How have external influences and internal dynamics contributed to its evolution? And most importantly, how have the Sudanese people been affected by and responded to this prolonged period of conflict? To fully understand this, we first need to take a deep dive into the history of the Sudan conflict. The Sudan conflict did not happen overnight. It started with seeds of discord sown decades ago. The roots of the Sudan conflict go back to the mid-20th century, when Sudan gained independence from the British-Egyptian rule in 1956. The newly formed country was a patchwork of diverse ethnicities and religions, with the Arab-Muslim north and the predominantly Christian and animist south. This diversity, rather than being a strength, became a source of division, leading to the First Civil War that lasted from 1955 to 1972. This war was a struggle for power, resources, and identity between the North and the South. The government in the North sought to impose its language and culture on the entire nation, while the South resisted, aiming to maintain its unique cultural and religious identity. The conflict was marked by brutal fighting, mass displacement, and a devastating famine that claimed countless lives. Peace was finally brokered with the Addis Ababa Agreement in 1972, granting the South significant autonomy. However, this peace was short-lived. In 1983, the Second Civil War erupted, ignited by President Jafar Numeri's decision to divide the southern region into 3 separate areas and impose Islamic law across the country, including the predominantly non-Muslim South. This move was perceived as an act of betrayal, reigniting the flames of conflict. The Second Civil War was even more devastating than the first, lasting 2 decades until 2005. It was characterized by extreme violence, including mass killings, forced displacements, and widespread hunger. This conflict culminated in the Comprehensive Peace Agreement of 2005, paving the way for South Sudan's independence in 2011. Yet the birth of the world's newest nation, South Sudan, did not bring the anticipated peace. Instead, it marked the beginning of a new wave of conflicts, with power struggles and ethnic tensions leading to a bloody civil war that started in 2013 and lasted until 2018. These events set the stage for a conflict that would span decades and impact millions of lives. As the conflict escalated, the impact on the Sudanese people became increasingly devastating. The escalation of the conflict in Sudan has been marked by a series of devastating events, each one causing more hardship and suffering for the Sudanese people. The Darfur crisis, which started in early 2003, was one of the first major events in this escalating conflict. This crisis emerged from a complex mix of economic, social, and political factors that led to violent clashes between rebel groups and government forces. The result was a humanitarian crisis of staggering proportions. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed and millions were displaced from their homes. The Second Civil War, which lasted from 1983 to 2005, was another significant event in the escalating conflict. This civil war was characterized by brutal battles, widespread famine, and a shocking disregard for human rights. Over 2 million people lost their lives and another 4 million were displaced. In more recent years, political upheavals have become a new source of conflict and chaos in Sudan. The overthrow of President Omar al-Bashir in 2019, for instance, triggered a period of political instability, with numerous factions vying for power. This political turmoil has caused further hardship for the Sudanese people, exacerbating existing economic and social problems. Throughout these events, the humanitarian impact has been immense. Millions of Sudanese people have been displaced from their homes, forced to live in overcrowded refugee camps with limited access to basic necessities. The ongoing conflict has also disrupted education, healthcare, and other vital services, deepening the suffering of the Sudanese people. Despite this escalating crisis, the Sudan conflict remains largely underreported in Western media. Why is it that the Sudan conflict, despite its severity, receives less media attention than conflicts in Ukraine or Palestine? This question leads to a conversation on the underreporting of the Sudanese conflict Western media. The lack of media coverage on such severe conflicts is not a new or isolated incident, and it certainly isn't confined to Sudan. There is an unfortunate bias in the Western media that prioritizes stories based on their geographical, cultural, or political proximity and relevance to the Western audience. This tendency of media outlets to favor stories that are closer to home or involve countries with which the West has significant geopolitical interests is a long-standing issue. Ukraine and Palestine, for instance, are enveloped in Western interests in a way that Sudan isn't. This bias can be dissected in multiple ways. One aspect of it is the geopolitical consideration. The conflict in Ukraine involves Russia, a major global power, whose moves are closely watched by Western countries. Similarly, the Israel-Palestine issue has religious, cultural, and political implications that echo quite strongly through the corridors of power in the West. The Sudanese conflict, however, lacks these direct linkages, relegating it to a lower rung of newsworthiness in the eyes of journalists and editors. Another factor at play here is the interest of the audience. News outlets, at the end of the day, are businesses. They need to cater to the tastes and preferences of their consumer base. Stories about conflicts in distant lands, in places that the average reader or viewer may find difficult to pinpoint on a globe, don't tend to garner as much interest. This is not a justification for the bias, rather a sad reflection of how the global consciousness works. What we see, hear, and read shapes our understanding of the world. When certain conflicts are consistently underreported, it can lead to a skewed worldview. This is not only detrimental to the global audience, but also to the nations affected by these conflicts. Furthermore, there's also the issue of compassion fatigue. The Sudanese conflict has been raging on for years, and it's easy for audiences to become desensitized to the suffering. This, in turn, can influence media outlets to shift their focus onto fresher, more gripping stories and issues. Yet the absence of coverage is not without consequences. It has far-reaching implications for the Sudanese conflict itself and its potential resolution. Without the watchful eyes the international community through media coverage, there's less incentive for the warring parties to actively pursue peace. Additionally, the humanitarian crisis, a direct result of the conflict, continues to worsen. It's largely unnoticed and unacknowledged by the rest of the world, owing to the scant media attention it receives. The role of media as a watchdog and a mirror of society can never be overstated. It's especially crucial in shedding light on the world's darkest corners and the happening there. But when such a vital role is compromised due to biases, it's not just the media's credibility that takes a hit, but also the lives of countless individuals affected by these forgotten conflicts. This lack of coverage has significant implications for the conflict and its resolution. The lack of media coverage leaves the voices of the Sudanese people largely unheard. In the shadow of conflict, there are stories of displacement, loss, and resilience that go largely untold. The Sudanese people, caught in the crossfire, bear the brunt of the escalating tensions. They are the forgotten voices, the unmentioned casualties of a conflict that rages on in relative silence. Picture families uprooted from their homes, fleeing from the terrors of war, their lives turned upside down. Imagine the children, their childhood stolen, their innocence lost to the horrors of conflict. Think of the parents, their dreams for their children shattered, their hopes for a peaceful future extinguished. These are the stories that are often overlooked, the narratives drowned out by the deafening silence of international media. This vacuum of coverage doesn't just rob the Sudanese people of their voice, it also impacts the flow of international aid, a lifeline for many in the face of such devastation. With less visibility comes less awareness, and with less awareness comes less aid. This vicious cycle leaves many Sudanese people feeling abandoned, their plight unnoticed and their suffering unacknowledged. Moreover, the dearth of media attention affects policy decisions. Without the pressure of international scrutiny, resolutions to conflicts can be slow and fraught with challenges. The Sudanese people are left waiting for peace, their cries for help echoing in the void left by the lack of media attention. The lack of coverage also hampers the conflict resolution process, the voices of those most affected by the conflict. The Sudanese people themselves are crucial in shaping a lasting and sustainable peace. Yet without a platform to share their experiences and perspectives, these voices remain unheard, their insights untapped. It is time to amplify these forgotten voices and shed light on the untold stories of the Sudan conflict. Let us remember that behind every statistic is a human story, a story of resilience in the face of adversity, a story of hope in the midst of despair. We owe it to the Sudanese people to listen, to amplify their narratives, and to take action. Their voices, after all, are the ones that matter most.